Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be getting started reading a book called Eve in Exile by Rebecca Markle. This book is, I'm just going to read the back of this book. The swooning ladies of the Victorian age and the suburban housewives of the 1950s genuinely needed to be liberated. That much is undisputable. So, first wave feminists held rallies for women's suffrage. Then second wave feminists marched for prohibition, jobs, and abortion. Today, third wave feminists stand firmly for nobody's quite sure what. But the modern woman who uses psychotherapic drugs at a rate never seen before in history needs liberating now more than ever. The truth is, feminists don't know what liberation is. They have led us into a very boring dead end. Eve in Exile sets aside all stereotypes of mid-century housewives, of China doll femininity, of Victorians feigning, of women not allowed to think for themselves or talk to the men about anything interesting or important. It dismisses the pencil-skirted, stiletto-heeled executives of TV, the outspoken feminists freed from all that hinders them, the brave career women in charge of their own destinies. Once those fictionalized stereotypes are out of the way, whether they're things that make you gag or think look pretty fun, Christians can focus on real women. What did God make real women for? Okay, so now we're going to read the introduction. You may follow along if you have a copy or just listen to me read. Introduction. The freedom of limits. You and I have been born into a world that's at war with boundaries. People are kicking over fences and knocking over barricades as far as the eye can see. Something they're knocking over pretend boundaries, and sometimes they're just pretending to knock over the permanent, immovable ones. But the one thing that is certain is that our generation here in this moment doesn't want to recognize any lines at all. We are a nation that has declared war on virtually all creational distinctives, but one area where the battle is especially hot right now is over the subject of gender. What began several centuries ago as a resentment of gender stereotypes has gradually but escalated to the point where our nation is now, offended by the insulting restrictions offered to us by the very fact of gender itself. The Christians, meanwhile, have for 200 years played their role as the proverbial frog in the pot. As I write this, the pot has very nearly reached boiling point, and we're not really sure how to get out of it now. In the last 12 months, Bruce Jenner has started calling himself a woman publicly, and no one is allowed to argue. Even Siri will correct me if I ask about Bruce Jenner. Replies with now being offered Caitlyn Jenner, and Glamour magazine has named him Woman of the Year. Incidentally, how hilariously insulting is that to all women everywhere? Glamour has declared that middle-aged white man who has been pretending to be a woman for a grand total of 1 year is already doing it better than all the rest of us. Of course, the science of the situation is completely set aside in these cases. Let's just run a little thought experiment. Let's say an archaeologist 1,000 years down the road finds Bruce's skeleton. Will he conclude that these are the bones of a man or a woman? If they test his DNA, they will find that he is a man or a woman. The answer is patently obvious. God made him a man, and a man he still is. The only thing he's managed to accomplish is that he's badly coupaged himself. But of course, no one is allowed to say that. Admit it. You're fervently looking over your shoulder right now to see if you're in trouble for even reading what I just said. We're all supposed to go down quietly and pretend that Bruce actually managed to change himself from a man to a woman, when of course he did nothing of the kind. In my own state capital, all of the school districts have been determined that any boy who feels like a girl may use the girls' locker room. Nationally, people are yelling for the boycott of entire states because of the shockingly intensive men and women signs on the doors of restrooms. The Supreme Court has solemnly climbed onto its soapbox and announced with a very serious face that marriage no longer has to do anything with gender. Boundaries everywhere are under a full-scale assault. People don't want to be bound by their race, by their gender, or by anything at all, really. They want to be free to soar untrampled through a categoryless and restrictionless universe. But this obliterating of lines is not actually leading us into a light-filled utopian future. We're actually in the middle of watching our culture trip over its shoelaces and fall unglamorously down the stairs. Chesterton said best, "Art is limitation. The essence of every picture is the frame. If you draw a giraffe, you must draw him with a long neck. If in your bold, creative way you hold yourself free to draw a giraffe with a short neck, you will really find that you are not free to draw a giraffe." Chesterton is illustrating a very profound truth about the universe, and one that we should do well to thoroughly understand. It sounds as if it would so fabulous and freeing to remove boundaries and restrictions, especially if you preface those words with all the right adjectives like outdated or oppressive. However, we are still intuitively understand that when we step out of our pretend world of what sounds nice and into the world of reality, life actually doesn't work that way. As for instance, imagine a shorter than average aspiring junior high school basketball player who feels like the height average advantage enjoyed by other taller players is unfair. We feel sorry for him. He's awfully short after all. So we decide to help him out. We can't do anything about his height, unfortunately, but one thing we definitely could do is remove the basketball hoops. Removing the hoops would ensure that height didn't matter, and no one had any unfair advantage over anyone else at all. We have leveled the playing field and made everything truly fair. On the other hand, however kind our intentions are, the only thing that we actually accomplish is that we have destroyed even the possibility of playing basketball. We haven't created additional basketball freedom for anyone, not even for the short guy. True freedom lies in the opportunity to pursue excellence, and that opportunity is dependent on boundaries that define and restrict the entire field of the endeavor. Basketball with any hoops or lines on the court isn't basketball. True freedom has to recognize boundaries. But which ones? We're Christian women, and we want to live in the way that God told us to. We want to be obedient, but we're looking out over this current playing field and wondering where on the earth we're supposed to stand. Old customs have been knocked sprawling, cultural norms have been overturned. Our daughters are born into the ruins of what used to be a Christian nation, and we are raising them in the wreckage of the West. What does obedience have to look like in this madhouse? Some women have restored to simply looking at the past, finding themselves some era that they identify with and trying to recreate now what they imagined femininity looked like then. So they pick up the era that appeals most to them and they go with it. Maybe it's the Jane Austen-y life, maybe a Little House on the Prairie life, maybe a 1950s suburbia life. Other women have just wandered out into the craziness of the present and tried to hang on to their Christianity while still embracing all the changes in women's roles that have happened over the last century in America. Virtually every cultural boundary surrounding femininity has been knocked down, both the good and the bad. Those lines desperately need to be redrawn because, as Chesterton pointed out, boundaries are essential to freedom. In the same way that the out-of-bounds lines and the fixed and unchanging 10-foot hoops in basketball are what create the court itself, and therefore the ability to play the game, as to the boundaries of gender are what create the possibility of excelling as a woman. The lines define and create the space in which excellence can thrive. But if there are no lines, if Bruce Jenner can win the game that being a woman, I may as well chuck it and decide to be a penguin instead. The cultural chaos in which we are currently living has caused many to despair and others to simply shrug and accept the postmodern crazy. But I want to argue that we are in in the perfect moment to rethink this whole subject, because our culture has kicked everything over since nothing is left but rubble. We actually have the remarkable privilege of being able to think through each line before redrawing it. We can check each boundary against scriptures before setting it back in place. What a blessing. What a huge opportunity. I might not have advocated that our culture burn the house down, but there is no denying that the demo has actually happened. It might be nice to start with a blank slate, rebuilding the house, but this time with a better closet space and less ugly lithium is actually a great opportunity. We are not living in the 18th century bound by restrictive cultural norms, which may or may not be scriptural. We are not stuck trying to tear down unbiblical cultural taboos, which hindered many godly women in earlier centuries. We are not, for instance, in the position of being told that our feminine intellects are too fragile to handle the rigors of an education. We are not bumping against the widespread notion that only men are capable of critical thought or the ability to do the difficult, meaningful work. Our cultural fight over femininity will actually be in the opposite direction, because we most certainly will be bumping up against our own cultural norms. Our fight is going to be with a culture that is antagonistic to the idea of trying to redraw any lines of it at all. We have a fantastic opportunity in front of us, but we also have a hostile audience. We are in the position of Nehemiah, returning from exile and trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, while the culture outside jeers. But I could stand in any moment. This is the one I would pick. We have a huge opportunity in front of us, and I hope we can make the most of it. The way of return is open to us, but it requires strong women who are willing to show actual courage if we want to bring Eve back from exile. Thank you. This has been a reading of the introduction of Eve in Exile. I hope you will join me next time, and hope you guys have a blessed rest of your week. Bye.